She died on a Tuesday, 11:47 in the morning. And I know that because I checked my watch. Right there in the hospital room, holding her hand, I checked my watch. 73 years old in the most important moment of my life, and I timed it like I was running a stopwatch. That's who I was. That's who I had been for 6 decades. A man who measured things, weighed things. A man who didn't believe in anything he couldn't put a number to. My name is Gerald. I'm 76 years old. And I want to tell you something I couldn't have said 2 years ago. Because 2 years ago I was still pretending I had it figured out. I was an engineer. 38 years at a civil firm in Cleveland. I built bridges, literal ones. And I used to joke, not entirely joking, that the reason bridges don't fall down is because engineers don't rely on faith. They rely on math. My wife Carol used to roll her eyes at that. She was a Methodist, had been her whole life. Choir on Sundays, Bible study on Thursdays, casseroles for neighbors after surgeries. And for 41 years I sat in the pew next to her, not because I believed, but because I loved her and it made her happy. That was the extent of my spiritual life, sitting in a pew for the woman I loved. And then she was gone. And I want to tell you what nobody tells men like me. Nobody told me that grief wasn't going to feel like sadness. I expected sadness. I had prepared for sadness the way an engineer prepares for load stress, with calculations, with contingency. I had thought about her death. We were both in our 70s. I had run the numbers. I knew statistically she might go first. I thought I was ready. I wasn't ready for what it actually was, which was nothing. Not sadness. Nothing. I would wake up at 5 a.m. and the house would be so quiet it almost had a sound to it. And I would lie there and try to feel something, and there was just this absence. Like someone had removed a load-bearing wall from inside my chest, and the whole structure was holding its shape out of habit. I didn't cry for 11 days. I'm not proud of that. I'm telling you because I think a lot of men listening to this right now know exactly what I'm talking about. And they think it means they didn't love their wife enough. It doesn't mean that. It means you've spent 60 or 70 years learning not to feel things in real time. It means the grief was there. It was already there. But it was running on a delay, like a signal traveling a very long distance. The crying came on day 12, in a grocery store, standing in front of the soup aisle because I couldn't remember whether Carol liked the tomato or the chicken noodle when she had a cold. And then it hit me that it didn't matter anymore, and that I would never have to remember again. And I stood there in that aisle for about 4 minutes holding a can of soup I never ended up buying. A woman about 35 stopped and asked if I was all right. I said I was fine. I was not fine. Here's what I didn't know then that I know now. And this is where my old engineer brain actually got useful for once. There's real physiology happening when you lose a spouse. Real, measurable physical damage. I know because my cardiologist explained it to me at a checkup about 6 weeks after Carol died. He looked at my blood work and he said, "Gerald, I need you to understand something." He called it the widowhood effect. The data on this is not ambiguous. Men who lose a long-term spouse have a significantly elevated risk of death in the months that follow. We're talking 41% higher mortality in some studies. 41%. That's not metaphorical. That's not a figure of speech about a broken heart. That is a measurable biological event. And here's why. When you spend 40, 50 years with someone, your nervous system literally wires itself around their presence, the sound of their breathing when they sleep, the weight of them on the other side of the bed, the way they hum when they're making coffee. Your body learns all of that as normal, as safe. And when it's gone, your body goes into a kind of withdrawal. Oxytocin, which is the hormone that regulates bonding and calm, drops sharply. Your cortisol spikes. Inflammatory markers go up. Your immune system starts making mistakes. You're not imagining it. You're not being dramatic. Your body is in genuine crisis. I'm telling you this not because I think you need a biology lecture. I'm telling you this because when I heard those numbers, something in me finally gave myself permission to fall apart. I had been white-knuckling it for 6 weeks because I thought grief was weakness, because that's what men like me were taught. You hold it together. You handle things. You don't make it everyone else's problem. And here was my doctor, a man with a stethoscope and a wall full of degrees, telling me that what was happening to me was real, that there was a mechanism, that I wasn't being self-indulgent. I needed that. Maybe you need it too. But here's what my doctor couldn't tell me. And this is the part that broke my 60 years of certainty. His advice was practical. Sleep, exercise, eat, see a therapist, get out of the house. Good advice. Correct advice. I tried to follow it. But at 2 a.m, when the quiet had a weight to it that I couldn't lift, none of that was enough. None of it touched the actual problem, which wasn't biochemical. The actual problem was that I had no idea who I was without her. She had been my only real friend for 30 years. I hadn't noticed until she was gone. I want you to sit with that for a second because I think it's going to land differently depending on where you are in life. 30 years. I had colleagues. I had neighbors. I had men I watched football with on Sundays before I started going to church with Carol. But none of them knew me. Not really. Carol knew every version of me. The arrogant young engineer who thought he had the world figured out. The man who cried when our son David broke his arm at age 7, and then lied to everyone, including David, about why his eyes were red. The man who sat in the hospital for 3 days when she had her gallbladder out, sleeping in a chair, because I couldn't be in our house alone. She knew all of it. And the men I knew, I could have called any of them. I had their numbers. But what would I say? What do men like us say when the structure collapses? We don't have a language for it. We were never taught one. His name was Raymond, 71, retired high school principal from Akron. I met him at a grief support group my daughter dragged me to, about 2 months after Carol died. I did not want to be there. I sat in the back with my arms crossed like I was being held at gunpoint. Raymond came in, sat down next to me without asking, and said, "First time?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Give it 3 sessions before you decide it's not for you." He'd lost his wife 18 months before. He was still there, still coming back. I asked him why. He said, "Because I didn't have anyone else to talk to who understood it. And I found out the hard way that you can't just keep it in a box." Raymond became, I want to use the right word here, not a best friend exactly, but the closest thing I had. We would walk every Wednesday morning, 3 miles through a park near his house. We didn't always talk about grief. Sometimes we talked about absolutely nothing. His granddaughter's soccer games, whether the city was going to repave Elm Street, normal life stuff. But underneath all of it was this shared understanding that neither of us would say out loud, which was, "I see you. I know what you're carrying. You don't have to explain it." That's what I lost when I lost Carol. And finding even a partial version of it in a grief group I'd resisted with everything I had is the thing that probably kept me alive. I mean that literally, given what my cardiologist had told me. Human connection isn't optional. It's not a luxury for people who have extra emotional bandwidth. It's load-bearing. It keeps the structure up. Now here's the part I still don't entirely know how to explain. The faith part. About 4 months in, I started actually listening in church instead of just sitting there. And one Sunday the pastor said something. I couldn't even tell you what it was now, but something in me responded to it. Not the theology, not the doctrine. I still couldn't tell you what I believe about God or afterlife or any of it, but the sense of it, the posture of it, the idea that you could be in the presence of something larger than your own understanding and not have to explain it or measure it or reduce it to a formula. That was new for me. I told Raymond about it on one of our Wednesday walks. He laughed, not unkindly. He said, "Gerald, sometimes when you've controlled everything your whole life, surrender is the most radical thing you can do." I thought about that for about 3 weeks. I've started to think of what I have now as faith wearing a lab coat. The evidence that I matter to something, or that love persists in some form I can't quantify, comes from the data of my own life. 41 years, 2 children, 6 grandchildren, a garden Carol planted 12 years ago that still comes back every spring without being told to. I can't tell you what that means metaphysically, but I can tell you that standing in that garden in April and watching those same flowers come up without her, something happens in me that feels like more than biochemistry. And I've decided I don't need to be able to measure it to let it matter. Now I want to talk to you about how long this takes, because I remember about 2 months in asking my therapist, her name was Dr. Hoffman, Karen Hoffman, about 55, had this way of letting silences sit that used to drive me absolutely insane and probably saved my life. I asked her, "When does it end? When does grief end?" And she said something I want to give you in full because it's still the best answer I've ever heard. She said, "Grief doesn't end. It changes shape. Think of it like a wall. Right now you're standing right up against it. You can't see around it, can't see past it. It takes up your whole field of vision. And right now that's just true. But over time you don't go through the wall. You don't climb over it. The wall stays exactly where it is. But you start building a life around it. You start putting rooms in the house around the wall. And the wall is still there, always will be. But you're not standing with your nose against it anymore. You're across the room. You can see it. You know it's there. And sometimes you walk up close to it again, because you need to, because that's where she still is. And then you walk back to the room. And the room has a door now. And sometimes you open the door and go outside. I'm standing at the door now. Some days I make it outside. Some days I sit in the room. But I'm not nose to wall anymore. And 2 years ago, I didn't believe that would ever be true. I want to say one more thing. To the people watching this who still have their person, who watch this for someone else, or out of curiosity, or because they're already worried about what's coming. Listen to me. Have the conversation now. Not a vague one, a real one. I mean, sit down with the person you love and ask them what they want their last years to look like, and tell them what you want yours to look like. Talk about the advance directive, the medical wishes, where the passwords are, who gets called first. I know that sounds cold. It isn't cold. It is the most loving thing you can do, because the person left behind won't have to guess. They won't be standing in a soup aisle, unable to remember whether you like the tomato or the chicken noodle. They'll know. You will have told them. Write it down if you can. And beyond the practical things, the more important thing, tell them now. Whatever you've been meaning to say, tell them now. Because at 11:47 on a Tuesday, if you're checking your watch instead of saying the thing, you will carry that for the rest of your life. I loved Carol. She knew it. But I could have said it louder. I could have said it on more Tuesdays that weren't the last one. Don't wait for the last Tuesday to be the day you finally meant it. That's all I've got. If this found you when you needed it, share it with someone you think is walking through this alone. Because loneliness after loss is its own kind of emergency. and nobody should have to white-knuckle their way through it by themselves. Leave a comment and tell me what you're carrying. I read them. And if you want more of these conversations, subscribe and come back. I'll be here.